Good afternoon. So there's been a lot of talk recently about knife steel, whether it's worth it to spend the extra on a higher end steel. Does it make much difference to the average person? So this is a video I've been thinking about doing for a long time actually, but I wanted to wait until I had a decent enough spectrum of different steels where, I'll offer my personal opinion on some of them, where I think I land in terms of that spectrum, excuse me, where I think I personally get the most value for your money, and what suits my needs. So this video isn't going to be about going into the metallurgy side of things so much. So if you're looking for that a geekier video, then this probably isn't the right one for you. I just wanted to run through why I collect different knife steels. Is it worth it to me? And is it worthwhile really spending that extra money? So this is just my opinion as one person, relatively unknown YouTuber, but having listened to other people's, listening to Paddy the other day, watching William's Knife Life, great channel. If you've not already checked it out, check that out. His Sunday chat. So I thought I would just give my opinion on these different steels. You'll probably hear the cat meowing in the background. He's an annoying little turd, so he will no doubt intervene at some point. So 440A. This I haven't done a review on yet. This is a Magnum Bowie made by Boker, but it has Magnum on the blade, which is their budget version. Ignore the terrible edge. It was before I learned to sharpen. I really struggled to sharpen this knife originally, and then when I got my fixed angle sharpener, it was fine, and now it is razor sharp. But this is 440A steel. I think this knife heading cost about 40 quid, and it is a big old chunk of steel for 40 quid. You can't really complain. 440A takes a great edge. It is fine enough that's the main thing really. One thing I wanted to get across: this is S35VN, this is 440A. Is this sharper than that? No. Once you've put the edge on, you're not getting a finer edge really. It's just that the properties of the steel are such that this is not as hard as this. So if edge retention is your main goal, you want it to hold an edge for longer without having to resharpen it, then this is obviously going to be a much better steel for that. Whereas this will, being a softer metal, will tend to roll and blunt quicker than something like this. So when people are talking about edge retention, that's really what they're talking about. But what is important in a steel? Well, that really depends on the person. There are different qualities to each steel, and I'm probably teaching you guys to suck eggs, but some are harder, some are tougher, meaning that they won't snap. So for people in outdoor environment, survival knives, things like that, then probably toughness is going to be higher priority to them. For everyday carry, a lot of people, it's going to be edge retention that makes the difference if they don't want to be sharpening the knife all the time. So being able to hold that edge is going to be more important. For other people working in wet or salty environments, then maybe corrosion resistance is going to be more important. So they're particular properties of each steel that people are looking at when they're deciding which steel to buy their knife in. That's completely separate to the look, design that's going to be appealing to you as an individual, and not to mention the geometry, the shape of the blade, the geometry of the blade, the geometry of the edge. All are equally as important as what steel it's in, but that is not to say that the steel is irrelevant. that it doesn't matter, there are all the other things are important, but the type of steel is not. Well, that's daft. You know, I said in my last video that would be like saying, well, I'm not even going to take the engine in my car into consideration. As long as I like the look of it, and as long as it's comfortable to sit in, then the engine doesn't matter. That might be true if you're old Doris taking your car out once a week to the shop on Sunday, but that's not going to be the same for everybody. Anyway, let's get through some of these steels and I can offer a brief opinion on them. So 440A, fine. This isn't a knife I'm going to be using every day. It's certainly not my only knife, so I don't mind having to come back and sharpen this more often than I would do with other knives, because it's not going to have the same level of edge retention. That said, it's stainless. This is a kind of end of the world knife for me. It's not something I would be legally allowed nor want to carry with me every day. It sits in a drawer in my bedroom. So 440A is a sensible choice. Why would you buy a super steel for a knife that you barely use? It doesn't make any sense. And 440A is probably the lowest I would go in terms of steels. That said, I grew up carrying unnamed steels from, you know, old Chinese sweatshops, what have you, without giving it a second thought. I never really even paid any attention to what steel a knife was in. That said, this one missing its scales because I'm part way through making some new wooden scales for it, is the CRKT Pilar in 8CR13. Again, nothing wrong with 8CR13. It's probably at the bottom end of where I would go, a bit like 440A, but it takes a screaming edge. You can put a mirror edge on 8CR13 because it's a fine enough grain steel, very, you know, as sharp as any other knife in any other super steel, but it being a slightly softer steel will tend to roll the edge quicker than a lot of other steels would do. So if you're happy, if you've only got one knife, you're happy sharpening it multiple times a week or whatever, then nothing wrong with 8CR13. Or likewise, like a lot of us making these videos, you've got loads of knives, so they're all in rotation. You're not carrying it day in, day out, therefore you're not going to have to sharpen it as often. Another aspect, properties of steel, is it easy to sharpen? 8CR13 is very easy to sharpen, so you can bring it back to life with a strop. If you do have to put it on a stone of some kind, it's soft enough that even a beginner is going to be able to take care of that. So there's another point. You know, there's a lot of people, if you want to have a knife to use on the outdoors, you're not going to be carrying around a fixed angle sharpener with you with the different grades worth of stones. You're going to have perhaps one item that you can sharpen your tools with. So they don't want super steels. They want something soft enough that they can easily put an edge back on in that kind of environment. So 440A, 8CR13 are going to make far more sense than something like S90V or M390. Because you're not going to have the ability to be able to sharpen it properly outside. So the next kind of similar level, this is the knife I use all the time when I go for a steak dinner or my Sunday dinner, going out. It's a Rough Rider, trying to think of the bloody name now. Anyway, it's Rough Rider, Denim micarta, 2 blades, clip point and a spay blade, and it's in Rough Rider's version of their carbon steel, so it's called T10. Someone was telling me the other day that it's probably comparable to 1095 that you'll find all these expensive GECs in, maybe not quite as good, but certainly close enough. And this is 20 quid instead of the 150 quid you'd be paying for a GEC. So this is a knife I use all the time. It's great, for 20 odd pound in this country. I think it looks nice, serves the purpose, and T10 holds an edge plenty long enough to be able to cut up multiple steak dinners or Sunday dinners. It's not something that I'm using day in, day out. This is my steak knife, so T10 is perfectly adequate for that use. Next up, slightly higher grade in the 440 series, 440C. This is the Boca Barlow Expedition. Very expensive for what it is and for the steel, but it's a nice knife. 440C, again, it's going to hold an edge longer than 440A. Stainless properties, so it actually makes a very good EDC knife blade. Easy enough to sharpen, holds an edge a decent amount of time, stainless and fairly cheap for the manufacturers to buy. So 440C, great EDC knife steel. Next up, on the cheaper end, D2 in this Luna. I mean, D2 has great levels of edge retention. People say it has larger carbides in it, so it doesn't take quite a fine edge. But that said, I managed to put a near mirror edge on this. It's not looking quite so mirror anymore, but again, for not much money, it has great levels of edge retention. It's not stainless, it's semi-stainless, so if that's more important to you, if you're working in wet environments, salty environments, that kind of thing, then perhaps D2 isn't the best option. But you see it a lot in outdoor knives, that kind of thing, in fixed blades. And to be honest, you know, it's more edge retention than most people are going to need. Will they really notice the bigger carbides? One drawback for D2, because of those bigger carbides, it's not particularly easy to sharpen. So if you're just starting out, yes, it's not going to need sharpening so often, but when it does, it's going to be harder to do than something like 440A or 8CR13. Anyway, I'll try and get through a bit quicker because otherwise this is going to be a very long video. Now we're getting into the kind of section where I like to live. This is where I think the best value comes in, because you can still get these knives very cheap, but they are great steels. So VG10, particularly in a thin, slicey, full flat format like this one, this is a real steel G-slip. G10 in a lot of the American channels almost gets described as a budget steel now, but for a long time high-end chef's knives were made, Japanese chef's knives were made out of VG10. There is nothing wrong with that steel. It takes a really fine edge, which is one thing that excites me. One of the reasons why I like collecting different steels is to find out what their properties are. And this takes a super fine edge. It is literally like a razor. I could shave with that, but it's not too difficult to resharpen. It's stainless. I just love VG10. It fits what I need perfectly. This isn't something, again, that's put to hard use day in, day out, slicing up a bit of food or opening boxes and all the other stuff that you do. I cut through layers and layers of thick outdoor carpet with this knife, which is just a slip joint, and it didn't blunt it at all. So I don't have any problems with VG10. It's one of my favourites. And the next one, N690. In modern knives, this is almost kind of dropped down the list now because all these new steels come out, the latest and greatest. N690 isn't seen as anything special, but it's a great all-round steel for EDC carry. This is in one of my favorites in the Kaiser Zip Slip. But again, it takes a fine enough edge. A fine edge is what I really like, when you can shave just tiny bits off the edge of receipt paper. It's super sharp, holds an edge a decent amount of time, stainless properties, and you don't have to pay through the nose to get it. So N690, another example of N690 here for the people who prefer traditionals. You do find in a lot of traditional knives, and I think they're the people who tend to complain about the blade steel obsession the most, partly because even buying at the GEC level, which is seen as the upper end of traditional knife collecting, you're getting 1095, not dissimilar to the steel in that, or 440C, the same steel as in that. So you're paying a lot of money for relatively budget steel. The N690 you tend to get in custom knives. So when people are spending £300 on a traditional knife, they're quite often getting Bolet N690. Nothing wrong with it. Great steel. Another one of my favourites. And I would say this area here is where I think the greatest value is. So going to another part of the world, we've got this Civivi Trailblazer, and this is in Sandvik 14C28N. I can hear the alphabet soup people furiously tapping their keyboard at this moment, but 14C28 I really like. Again, very fine grained steel, takes a super edge, not too difficult to sharpen, all the same properties that I like these for, and you get it cheap relatively. This wasn't a particularly cheap knife because you've got the Damascus blade and the faux carbon fibre thing, but the other version of this isn't too expensive, and this holds an edge a great amount of time. It's a really good option for small slicey EDC knives. 14C28N is another one of my favourites. Then we start getting into the more expensive steels, and again I'd just add that part of my enjoyment in collecting knives is to collect lots of different types of steel so that I can see what their properties are, whether you can put a mirror edge on it, how easy it is to resharpen, all that kind of thing is part of the excitement for me. And I get that might not be the case for other people. They're quite happy just to have everything in 440A, and the design of the knife is more important. But horses for courses, whatever makes me happy in the hobby might not be the same for you. So let's all just try and allow each other to enjoy what we want to enjoy about the hobby. No one is right or wrong. It's all subjective. Anyway, the more expensive ones, it's dropping down now with the introduction of S45 VN, but S35 VN has long been one of the highly respected steels on the more expensive American knives, what have you. This is quite an expensive knife. It's best tech in titanium, but it has the S35 VN. Holds an edge a great amount of time. Again, all the things I like about these. Do I get really anything extra out of this than I would do out of that? Not really. I never finish a day's work with that and think, if only I got the S35 VN. They're not that much difference in use. The difference is in the design, the price differences in the design, the materials, that kind of thing. You're just paying for a higher end product. But for my personal use, I wouldn't be lacking anything taking that than I would that. So S35 VN I like. Another one I seem to be collecting quite a lot of, and I don't like to collect too many knives in the same steel, but Bola M390, like S35 VN, it's a super steel, it's a powdered steel. Again, very fine edge. I haven't resharpened this one myself. I've had it over 6 months. Yes, it gets put in rotation. It's not carried every day, but I've not had to sharpen that yet. And you tend to find a lot of the more expensive Italian knives all use Bola M390. Of course, America then brought out their own version of M390, which is, what is it, something 20, but it's basically the same steel, but made by, I think it's Crucible. M390 holds an edge a really long time, stainless, fine grain. If this is going to be your one and done knife, that's when it starts making sense to pay the extra for the better steels. If you like the design of the knife, it's the right shape of blade, the geometry is correct, the blade geometry is how you want it, then it does make a difference having a steel that you don't have to sharpen multiple times a week if you're using this every day. Not everybody enjoys sharpening. That's what I'm saying. Steel choice is not unimportant. It is part of an overall package. But if you've only got one knife, then that blade steel needs to do what you need it to do, whether it be not rust, not stain, not go blunt every other day, whatever it is. So M390 is a great all-round steel, high-end super steel. Really like it. And the last one I will show you is the Manly Wasp in S90V. So this is relatively cheap for that material. This knife only cost about 70 quid. But S90V, I mean, it just holds an edge forever. I've not had to sharpen this yet. I've had it months and months. It's had hard use. It's just such a hard steel that it holds an edge for a really, really, really long time. On the flip side of that, it's not a particularly fine-grained steel. It's got very large carbides, which makes it very hard to sharpen. And while it's still sharp, still very sharp, you can feel, as you're pushing through material. I really like the finer grain steels where it feels like a scalpel. There's barely any resistance. It's just like a laser through that material. And S90V isn't really like that in my experience. It's still very sharp. It will shave paper, but it's a toothier edge. And if you're looking to put a mirror edge on something, then S90V is probably not going to be the right choice for you. If you're taking this out to work with you every day and pushing it through material all day long, then that super hard steel and that super long edge retention is going to make sense for you. So there's no right or wrong answer. There's no easy way to say which steel is better, because it all depends on the use and subjective opinion. Where are you going to be using it? What are you going to be using it for? How often? For how long in a day? Do you need something super hard that's going to stand up and let you go to work for the entire week before you need to start touching it up? Or are you just carrying a small traditional pocket knife to cut the odd tag off and open a bit of tape on boxes, in which case you probably don't need something like S90V. I really like this section in the middle. I think this is the perfect compromise. These steels have all the qualities that I need, but you can buy for a reasonable price. That's not to say I don't enjoy and look forward to buying these knives in the super steels, just so I can play with them and see what the quality of the steel is like. But that said, again, I carry all of these. This gets used more than most, and it's in a basic carbon steel because I use it for eating. Use it as a steak knife. Carrying this every day, which I did do when I first got into the hobby, I quickly realised that within a day or so it was going to go blunt. So that's my take on it anyway. I hope some people found that of use, and I will see you again soon. Ta-ta.